Antony Loewenstein, an independent journalist, the author of The Palestine Laboratory. Antony was based in occupied East Jerusalem between 2016 and 2020. Always a pleasure to have you on, Antony. I don't know if you heard our correspondent Nizar Sadawi just here on set with me. We know that Gaza has been hermetically sealed to Palestinians. Nobody in, nobody out. OK, a few patients with urgent medical needs having been given permission to go abroad. Nizar says he doesn't think he'll ever be able to go back to Gaza. That's what Israel wants, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think in the foreseeable future, he's tragically, outrageously right. And when we're talking about what Israel has now formally announced, and anyone who's following this conflict, certainly since October 7, but before, can't be shocked by what Netanyahu is proposing here, essentially indefinite occupation of the entire Gaza Strip. What I fear is not just that, which of course is catastrophic enough, but that if we speak about 1 year from here or 2 years, will there be any Palestinians left in Gaza? I'm not saying Israel's going to kill every single one of them. I mean that there is still active negotiations between Israel, the US, and a number of states to force them, bribe them, give them weapons to take Palestinians. There was a story in the Financial Times this week which gave some indications about what kind of countries we're talking about. Somalia, Somaliland, Libya, Egypt, Jordan, Indonesia. I mean, the idea, for example, that the world's biggest Muslim country, Indonesia, would take sizable numbers of Palestinians should be utterly inconceivable. And I note that there's a Jakarta Post, a leading newspaper there, had an editorial this week which said, essentially to the leadership in that country, you have got to be joking. We cannot be taking huge amounts of Palestinians, essentially, to get them out of Gaza permanently. So that's what I fear, that there will be no Palestinians left in Gaza within 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. That, to me, is I fear where this is going.
So does that Israeli projection of Gaza's future mean that Benjamin Netanyahu has to stay as prime minister? Because any subsequent government, how difficult might it be for a successor to undo Benjamin Netanyahu's plan?
In terms of, I notice your reports have been saying, and there's no doubt that a lot of Israeli Jews are opposed to this idea of an indefinite occupation. But the fact is that the majority of likely successors to Netanyahu, there'll be an election almost certainly next year in Israel. Of course, whether he wins is impossible to say, but the likely successors are not very different on the key issues. What should happen to Gaza? What should happen to the West Bank? Indefinite occupation. Yes, they're opposing what Netanyahu is suggesting in Gaza now, but the fact is they have pretty much been in lockstep with Netanyahu for the entire 22 months of this genocide. That's the reality. And even just this week, there was a poll of amongst Israeli Jews about how they felt about starvation in Gaza. 80% of Israeli Jews did not care that Palestinians, 1.5 hours away from Tel Aviv, are starving. They don't care. So when Israelis talk about being opposed to Netanyahu's plans, let's be clear what the opposition is about. It's not about Palestinians. It's about the fear, justifiably, that the roughly 20 or so living hostages will die, be killed by who knows who, Israel or I guess potentially Hamas. So there's no care within mainstream Israeli society for Palestinians. They do not exist, they are dehumanized, and they are vilified. And that, to me, I think shows that Israeli society is heading in a direction which I've said for a long time, and I think it more and more towards a fundamentalist theocratic future where any kind of so-called liberals or progressive will have no place in that country.
Does that kind of theocratic way of thinking tie in perfectly with Donald Trump's ideas about how the world should look? Because we know, Antony, that for decades and decades and decades, Palestinians, take away any of them who hold weapons, but Palestinians have almost certainly been some of the most downtrodden and persecuted people in the world for the way their lives have been controlled by an outside power. And now the Americans appear complicit in this Israeli plan.
The US has always regarded, when I say the US, I'm talking about successive presidents, and this is Republican or Democrat. I mean, let's not think that somehow Joe Biden would have been any different if he was still in office, or Kamala Harris had she won in November last year. There is profound contempt for Palestinians. It's worse than contempt. It's essentially acceptance and acquiescence and funding and arming. an Israeli reality. Obviously, we are in a different reality now in terms of post-October 7 and the fact that Palestinians in Gaza are being genocided. And let's not forget the West Bank, which increasingly is being targeted in profoundly violent ways, where thousands and thousands of Palestinians are being dispossessed on a daily basis. This is happening in a massively accelerated way. And when one talks about the world is opposed to what Israel's proposing here, sorry, who is opposed to it and what are they doing about it? The Europeans have imposed no tangible sanctions. The Arab states haven't really either, frankly. And the rest of the Western world is increasingly concerned, whatever that means. There's been no tangible impact on Israeli economy. That's what will have an impact. And any Israeli who you speak to who's opposed to this says, unless there's economic pain on us as Israeli Jews, nothing will change. So yes, Netanyahu believes he has Trump's support, which why wouldn't he think that? He certainly does. But the ultimate question, and I've said this for a long time as someone who's obviously a Jew, none of this is bringing Israeli Jews safety. And in fact, it's making Jewish life globally far more precarious. Far more precarious because Israel is claiming to speak in our name as Jews while it's committing a genocide in our name.
Antony Loewenstein, thank you so much, Antony.
Thank you.